Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There it is, so you don't miss any of our football content this season. It has been, if I might say, fantastic. College football reactions presented by JLab. JLab has the best audio products in the game. They're ready to take care of you this football season. Traveling to watch your favorite team or just streaming the game at home. Find the blue box at Walmart, Target, Best Buy, or go to jlab.com. Love their stuff. The blue box. Okay, so I want to talk Georgia, Texas. So Georgia beat Texas 30-15. Again, Georgia couldn't do anything offensively, and they beat Texas. So my big takeaway on this was Carson Beck is no longer a first-round quarterback. Like, he's just not. You just can't draft him in the first.
Is he a second-day quarterback?
I wrote down here. So he was 23 of 41. This is with Georgia talent. No touchdown, 3 picks. I wrote down top of third round. I mean, when I watched him, I'm like, he feels like a third round pick. Georgia actually was decent on third down, but they only had 14 first downs. Go to Austin and double the Longhorns. But Quinn Ewers, now Texas couldn't run the ball at all. And they almost felt, I will say this, Georgia has been in so many of these big games over the last 6 years. Georgia was totally ready for the moment. Texas has been in about 3 of these, 2 or 3 with Sark. I don't think they were ready. They were atrocious on third down. They couldn't run the football. Quinn Ewers, I thought, I still think because of his arm, he'll get drafted somewhere in the first round. Somebody will think they can solve him. But Texas averaged with the best offensive line in college football, 3.4 yards a play. When I watched that game, and by the way, Oregon had 2 bad games and won. Ohio State lost, but I didn't think played poorly. Bama's had a stinker. Georgia's had a stinker. Texas has had a stinker. This is why you have a 12-game playoff. This is, I think Ohio State, to me, is the most consistently good team, whereas Oregon got Ohio State at home. You got to be careful. They look terrible against Boise State and terrible against Idaho. I kind of look at this Texas game and I think this is just one of those games that Georgia's been in. I mean, it's just they've been in this game 6 years, probably 3 games a year like this.
I thought it was a personality game, and I've been critical over when it comes to Sark over the years, but I've slowly come around. He's clearly an excellent play caller. I saw him live. He's brilliant at that. It's clear how hard he recruits and how much passion he puts inside this program. But at the end of the day, he's a quarterback, right? That's who he is at his core. And Kirby Smart is Saban's mentee, and he's a crazy-ass defensive guy. Like, at his core, he's a crazy defensive guy. I mean, we've seen it on the sideline, but he's a former safety. He's a tough guy. And usually quarterbacks, like, they're just not super angry all the time. Sark's more intellectual. He's more offense. This was a game, and Kirby said it after the game, like, we didn't come here to take pictures and do all the superstar BS. Well, what happened in that game? It was all about the line of scrimmage, where Texas actually has, supposedly a bunch of NFL guys. They had 7 sacks, and it felt like they had 25 pressures. And that, can you imagine how on edge Kirby was all week with just the defensive side of the ball? And the way you can't, to me, you can't manipulate that stuff. I've been in these buildings, like the head coach's personality. It is what it is. You either have the crazy. Listen, Andy's not like, coming with an iron fist on everybody, but he does create toughness with the way he practices. Sark, the offensive guys, historically, Lincoln, Lane, they're just not doing Oklahoma drills. Like at a moment's notice, the Saban types, the Kirby types will just blow a whistle. Maybe not as much anymore, but that personality of a practice, you can't fake that stuff. And you could tell from the jump, you're like, Georgia is out for blood. This is a team, all they've heard about is everyone put in Texas who's new to the SEC, and they run it now. And Kirby looks around and goes, that is not happening on my watch. And they destroyed them up front. I mean, that Walker kid, he had 3 sacks. He was all over the backfield. Yeah. But to have 7 sacks, and even Arch came in, you could tell. I had money on Georgia, but I then started feeling I was rooting for Arch, and right away I'm like, yeah, he looks a little overwhelmed. This is a lot. And Quinn Ewers just isn't good enough. Like, to me, Carson Beck is a third-day pick. And I don't, part of a quarterback is the character and stuff. I know nothing about that, but just as a
Yeah,
player, I just don't think he's that
same.
good. But Kirby Smart would go, I've won national championships with third-day picks before. You ever heard of Stetson Bennett? I won back-to-backs with that guy. So I'm Sabins and him are comfortable playing with that. Or if you look at Sark, what do they have invested in their quarterback room between the two guys, Ewers and Arch? $5 million? I mean, whatever they're paying Carson Beck, Kirby's like, yeah, that's probably too much. Because he wants to run the ball and play defense.
I did think, though, because of the 12-team playoff, it was the way Texas.
Sark's team's good. I don't think Texas sucks by any means.
I
just think that was an overwhelming performance. Georgia's probably beating everybody in the country.
And I think it's how Texas had to lose to win a national championship, because this Texas team is so pretty and so talented quarterback and so big. They win the hotel lobby. I mean, you come out at midfield, you're like, geez, these guys don't look like a college team.
I saw them live 2 weeks ago. They look remarkable at every position.
And it's like, oh no. Now, last year before the 12-team playoff, you don't want to lose like this in college football. I mean, that'll take you from 1-4, and all of a sudden you get to an overtime game against, some other team, but that's how the new college football, John, with a 12-team playoff. If you want to win a natty, you need to get your butt handed to you once a year. And because these two teams, there's a better than 50% chance they'll play again. And
the Final Four, the final.
Right. So it's like, to me, as I watched it, I thought, okay, if Texas outplayed them and lost, it would be hard to go back and say, hey, guys, you got to play a perfect game. Texas was humiliated at home. And I'm writing down these numbers. They were 2 for 15 on third down. They had 29 rushing yards. They got their butt handed to them at home. And my take was, in a weird way, we've talked about March Madness before. These Kansas teams, you'll play a really good team out of conference, and it's like, no, it's okay to get your butt handed to you in December, because in March, you can put the tape back into your team and say, remember this team that knocked you out?
But the one thing in March Madness, that's a good example. What's his name? Bennett just retired at Virginia, and he had that historic loss in the first round. And obviously, like any great coach, if you go to the tournament enough, you're going to have some awful losses. Because only one game, and anything can happen. Well, my take is really on both these two teams. And to me, if Georgia's defense plays like that, they would be hard for anyone to beat, because up front, they just smother you. But both quarterbacks, if you're playing another good team, could lose to anybody. Because Ewers, when he's bad, he just felt awful. Like, it felt like unplayable. Yeah. I mean, everyone was thinking it on their couch, like, Sark, you got to go to the bullpen. It was that clear to him, which could not have been an easy thing to do. Now, granted, it's a unique situation with Arch. He's not like your typical high recruit, because he goes right back to Ewers, but he had no choice. Like, he was playing a losing football game. Carson Beck kind of was too. So in these big games against other good teams, like, you could lose it. Will Howard, actually, I thought watching that game against Oregon,
I thought it was good.
We'll see how I thought so too. But like, what if he has a bad game? Like, all these teams, we'll see Dylan Gabriel, who's probably, has the best statistics of all these guys. But like, you don't have the faith like a Joe Burrow, right? Or one of those level guys that, like, no matter what, he's going to make a play at any moment in the final 8, the final 4. These guys could have a bad game, and it could cost their team this. I'm not confident in any of these teams. Like, I think they're all going to be there. It's pretty clear who's going to be the last 6-7 teams standing right now, right? Who the best teams are. Oregon, obviously Georgia, Texas, Ohio State, like, and then a couple more. We can nitpick
Tennessee,
from like 5
maybe,
or 6. But it's like, their quarterbacks, even Tennessee, like, their quarterback at any moment can throw the game. Like, all these guys, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, that is not the version of guy. Shador, I would have the most confidence, but they blew that Kansas State game. They're probably not going to get in, and their team wouldn't be good enough. Like, they'd have no chance to block Tennessee or Georgia. Yeah. But like, if you put Shador, like the way he's playing on one of these teams, I would have a lot more confidence. I can't just with a straight face pick Georgia to win the Natty. I don't trust the quarterback. Quinn Ewers, like, I don't think he's that good, right? Will Howard, we'll find out as the season goes on. Aller made some great plays against USC, but he's got to do it against, he's got to do it more than one time. So he's only done it one time in his career. So I think that's the biggest question mark, with all the top teams in college football, is like their quarterback. Do they get overwhelmed in a game, throw 3 or 4? Both those quarterbacks could have thrown like 5 picks each. I mean, their balls were bouncing off the other colored jersey countless times. They looked overwhelmed. They really did. Even Carson Beck, who was just I had someone text me that he's like, I don't remember a guy, because there was a lot of
Oh, I
media hype,
thought,
but there was a lot of NFL hype.
yes, he was a first round
He's like,
pick.
I don't remember a guy losing millions this fast. I mean, we're not even to Halloween, and everyone's like, oh, can't draft this guy high.
So I want to talk USC, even though they are a losing team. They're now 3-4. Because here's what is remarkable. And I think it's worth 6 or 7 minutes with us because, people know I follow him. So Billy Edwards from Maryland's not a great college quarterback. They were 2 for 13 on third down. They had 56 yards rushing. And Maryland beat USC. And USC has led every game, most of them late, but because they are so egregiously bad on the offensive line and so young, they can't put together like a 12-play drive to seal wins. They had Penn State beat. They had Maryland beat. They had Minnesota. They never felt like they were in control. But it's interesting about this is that I was talking to somebody very close to USC, and he said, listen, he's got a Jimbo Fisher deal. USC's not writing $70 million checks, and they're not getting rid of him. But there's been this feeling since he's been there in the administration that he has a lot more control over USC than USC has over him. In fact, they're building this big facility now, $300 million, because it's in his contract. And if they don't build it, he can leave. But it is interesting. I actually think they have some really, really good line talent. They're just all redshirting and they're young. But what's happening with USC is fascinating. They're not recruiting California. If you go look at the rivals, take rivals, for instance, or On3, these recruiting sites, and you go to the top 40 players in Southern California in this class, they're getting like 3 guys. It's like Bama, Oregon, Bama, Ohio State, Oregon, A&M, Louisville, Alabama. And there is something about college football. It's very territorial, John. You can lose. But if you're not in Ohio State, you just have to take a 3-star linebacker occasionally because he's an Ohio kid. You just have to do it. You got to take the tight end who's a 3-star. He's from a big high school program locally. There may be a 3-star Florida kid, but you're going to have to do certain things. Ohio is proud of Ohio. LA is very transient, doesn't really care about that. But I'm hearing it now from 2 and 3 different people, like he's just not connecting with LA coaches. And it's like, can you imagine Kirby Smart doing most of his recruiting in Texas? Like there is something about Lincoln. There's this sense that he's aloof. He's not necessarily relatable. He can be off-putting. It's not just the losing. Once you start losing, people put a microscope on your program. Now you have losing. He's not really going, he doesn't wow boosters, right? Like that was the undoing for Chip Kelly. You're not winning and you don't take care of the donors and boosters. Do you think today, if USC could just go, we're starting over, would they?
Well, I think they'd both want a divorce. Like to me, Lincoln feels, has always felt, and I've said this to you from the beginning, regions and where you're from matters. In college football, does not matter in the pros. And in college football, it just does, because recruiting your region, especially when it's in Southern California, when a ton of good players come from, matters. Well, who could relate? Pete Carroll. Why? He's a California guy, right? I mean, you look at the best coaches over the last, I don't know, several decades on the West Coast. Jeff Tedford, where's he from? California. Chris Peterson, where'd he coach? Boise State, Washington. Where'd he grow up? California, went to UC Davis. Mike Bellotti, where was he from? West Coast. Chip Kelly, there are outliers. Urban went to the South. Chip Kelly was the Northeast, came to Oregon. But I think for Kirby Smart, like, why does he work in the SEC? I wonder. Nick Saban, West Virginia, to me, pretty similar. Had a lot of success. You see it right now with DeBoer. He's going to get a lot of heat. He's not one of theirs. And I think the USC thing, Colin, they're 1-4 in the Big Ten. It's to me, the Penn State thing, that's an awful tough loss to take, but it's still Penn State. They're really good. When you start losing to Minnesota and Maryland, especially the stat, I was going to read it to you. They've, like you said, they've held a lead in every game they've played this year. And over the last 20 years, 200 teams have had a fourth quarter lead in all of their first 7 games. Only one other team during that span has had a losing record. So they're like a statistical anomaly to lose all these games. Yesterday was insane. I mean, they're up 28-14 in the fourth quarter. I mean, how does that, it's just, and this gets back to like Sark has way better talent. But you can't fake being a tough guy in football when you're not. Like Dan Campbell's a tough guy. The Harbaugh brothers are tough
Vrabel.
guys, right? Tomlin's a tough guy. Vrabel's a tough guy. Belichick could manipulate it like through mind games and the type guys he surrounded himself with. I'm not saying he's going to win a fist fight, but you'd also say Belichick's pretty mentally tough, right? I mean, he's not easy to break. And I just think I look at Lincoln and I go, I just don't see a tough guy. And they've gotten into these spots, especially on the road. These are not, you're not going to Oregon State, right? Or Arizona State where it's an easy flight. These are long. How long is the flight to Maryland? Is that a 5-hour flight? Right? You go into Minnesota, that's probably 4.5 hours. These are tough travels, and they just mentally crumble. And I never thought, I thought he was a really good coach, so I understood why they wanted him. LSU wanted him too.
I still think he's a very clever schemer and play designer.
But it's just like they need a defensive coordinator. And it's not like he has this long list of guys, because the Leach guys, think of the tree that he comes from. It's kind of it's not a tree that produces many like tough physical football teams. That's not like his ethos as a football guy, right? The Mike Leach, the way he wants to play, he'd ideally like to win 45-38. That's how he had a lot of success in Oklahoma with the Baker teams. They were scoring a ton of points. But Colin, their schedule's not crazy hard, but you go like 7-5, 7-5. This is year 3.
They have two.
Didn't him and
two playable offensive tackles in the program.
Him and Brian Kelly got hired the same year, right? Year 3. And we talked about this when they got in a little scuffle about him wanting to cancel the game. He ended up beating them. But what has transpired since? You watch Brian Kelly's team, like, is LSU going to the playoffs? Probably. I mean, they might. Look, check their schedule. And they're getting better and better. And he's playing. They're both playing Nussmeier and Miller Moss. It's not like you've got Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams anymore. And I don't know, man. I think you go back. Let's just look at those two guys. Brian Kelly has a long resume. You could put him anywhere and he'll figure it out. Lincoln did inherit Oklahoma, which at the time was humming. I mean, they were a lot like Chip Kelly in Oregon. It wasn't top 2 every year, but they were top 18, 15 every year. You just had to take that next step. That's an easier thing to do than just, hey, here's a shit sandwich, Nick Saban, what Brian Kelly, get me just 11 wins every year. That's really difficult. And only what Urban can do, there's a short list of guys that can do that. Even though if Lincoln's a really good coach, I just think he fits more, I don't know, like some Big 12 team. I just think that's the way he wants to play. Well, this Big 10 has been very, very difficult on him, and it's way harder travel. Like they're like traveling like NFL teams.
Yeah.
This is conference play. You're flying 4 hours, 5 hours. Yeah. That never happened in the history of these programs.
It's late October. He's getting weather breaks. Minnesota was warm, a little windy. Maryland weather was good. There's going to be years where it's snow. Like when you go to they have one playable running back, like in a big spot, a guy you would trust with the ball. They have 2 playable offensive tackles. We're 3 years in. Their NIL is $13 million a year. Now, it's not Oregon or Georgia or Texas, but it's in the Ohio State realm. It's about 13. I was telling somebody this weekend who's really close. I said, there's 3 or 4 positions you buy in the NIL: quarterback, left tackle, edge rusher. You'll find receivers. I mean, they have an okay quarterback. Left tackle, they're playing a freshman. They don't have an elite edge rusher. It's like, Lincoln, don't buy corners. You know, that's you. This is LA. People run. You can get backs, corners, receiver. You can get those guys. You don't pay tight ends in the transfer portal. You don't pay guards in the transfer portal. You know, they have an offensive and a defensive lineman from Wyoming, and both start. It's like, what are we doing here?
I know times are a lot different than, you know, the heyday of Pete Carroll, but when I close my eyes and I think of those rosters and when I got to college and they started really taking off, the base of the squad, and this is what you opened up saying, was all Southern California, LA and San Diego. They're best players. And then because he was such a great recruiter, he'd go get a Joe McKnight from Louisiana, this guy from New Jersey. He'd nitpick. And I get the recruiting world's changed, but to me, how do they build momentum in recruiting if he's not Mr. Pizzazz? Like, so that's not his thing. Their team's not as good. Oregon, Ohio State, I mean, Alabama and Oklahoma and these other programs for years have been coming into Southern California as USC has kind of, you know, been in the middle ground. You see the numbers that Clay Helton through his first 34 games and Lincoln Riley, he has a better record. I just think this thing is headed toward one. Now there's so much money on the line. I don't know why, if Lincoln, like, why you would just give a divorce, but he's got to be kind of miserable. This can't be a natural fit living on the beach. Like, he does not feel like that guy. Pete did. I think Lane would have no
Stark.
problem doing it again. Like, it's yeah, this is not. It does not feel, when you look at Lincoln Riley, the comfortability in the colors and the clothes, and it's obviously not working because 1-4 in the Big Ten. It's one thing if you had lost to Ohio State, Penn State. I mean, they are losing to awful teams. Like, Maryland just should never have won that game, ever.
Don't have many players.
Do you, what do you, I mean, do you think that there's a divorce imminent here? Or?
I think they have. I think Jen Cohen, the AD, she's gonna stay with him, but it gives her a lot of leverage.
I'm not saying they fire him, but I'm saying, do you think Lincoln's happy? Like, do you think this is just like, this isn't working? So is this one of these things that, does he want to do this?
Yeah, I think they're losing close, and the team is so young offensively. I think he can rationalize the losses and say, we bring everybody back except a running back and a center. And I do think they'll be better next year. I just think, I can assure you, Jen Cohen and the administration and the boosters, they didn't think they were winning a natty, but this has been.
Didn't think they were going 7-5 either.
5-7. Just keep your fingers crossed. Yeah. John Middlekauff, former NFL scout, 3 and Out's his podcast. Good seeing you, buddy.
See you, Colin.